The HR director didn't even look up from her desk when she said it. She just slid the termination letter across and said, "Your brother signed a confession. We have everything we need. Security will walk him out." Then she finally looked at me, and there was nothing in her eyes, no hesitation, no doubt, just the quiet confidence of someone who had done this before and gotten away with it every time. My name is Ryan Callahan. I'm 31 years old. For 6 years, I worked digital forensics and cybersecurity for a federal defense contractor outside of Washington, D.C. I know how data moves, how it hides, and more importantly, how it lies when someone with enough money tells it to. The day my brother called me from the parking lot of Hargrove Properties, voice shaking, hands shaking, I didn't say much. I told him to go home. Don't talk to anyone. Don't delete anything. I said. They just made the worst mistake of their lives, and they don't know it yet. My brother's name is Daniel. He's 24. He spent 2 years working as a junior accounts coordinator at Hargrove Properties, one of the largest private real estate firms in the Mid-Atlantic region. He was good at his job, methodical, careful, the kind of person who triple-checked figures before submitting anything. He got 2 performance reviews, both excellent. He was quiet, worked overtime without complaining, and genuinely believed that if you did your job right, the job would take care of you. He was wrong. But that wasn't his fault. That was the lesson they were about to teach him, and the one I was about to teach them. The man at the center of it was a 28-year-old named Preston Hargrove III, the founder's grandson. He'd been brought into the company 18 months earlier after reportedly washing out of 2 other ventures, one a startup that collapsed, one a fund management role his family had quietly paid him out of. He came into Hargrove Properties with a corner office, an executive title he hadn't earned, and the kind of casual arrogance that only comes from never having faced real consequences for anything. Preston was skimming. Not in an obvious way, not wire fraud, not forged signatures. He was running vendor invoices through shell accounts, marking up service fees, routing commissions through a shell LLC his college roommate controlled. Small amounts per transaction. Dozens of transactions per month. Over 14 months, it added up to just under $200,000. And when the discrepancy got flagged during a quarterly reconciliation, Preston needed someone to absorb the blame. Daniel was the most recent person to have touched those files. That was enough. I didn't storm into their offices. I didn't call a lawyer that first day, and I didn't post anything online. What I did was drive to Daniel's apartment, sit at his kitchen table, and spend 4 hours going through everything he remembered, every file he'd accessed, every email thread, every instruction he'd been given. Daniel is the kind of person who keeps things. Notes from meetings, forwarded emails, screenshots of approval chains. He wasn't doing it to protect himself, he just had the habit. When I finished listening, I opened my laptop and told him to get some sleep. He asked me what I was going to do. I told him the truth. I'm going to find what they buried, and I'm going to make sure it can never be buried again. The first thing I needed to understand was the structure. Hargrove Properties had 4 divisions, 2 subsidiary LLCs, and a shared services model for accounting, which meant transactions could move between entities in ways that looked routine unless you knew the pattern. I'd spent 6 years building pattern recognition protocols for systems that handled classified logistics contracts. Vendor invoice fraud through a shell company wasn't a new problem. It was actually a fairly old one. Within 48 hours, I had a working theory. Within 5 days, I had confirmation. Daniel had been given editing access to a vendor reconciliation file 3 weeks before the termination. He'd been asked to update payment statuses, routine work. The kind of task that gets delegated down when someone more senior doesn't want their fingerprints on something time-consuming. But the file he was given had already been altered. The original version, the one that would have shown the discrepancy in Preston's vendor accounts, had been replaced with a modified version that made it look like Daniel had entered the anomalous figures himself. Whoever did it was good. They'd maintained the same metadata format. But they'd made one mistake. The internal revision history, the kind that lives in the document's embedded XML structure and doesn't show up in any normal view, had a timestamp conflict. 2 edits marked as happening at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, same second, same file from 2 different user credentials. One was Daniel's. One was a credential tied to a service account that Preston's administrative assistant managed. That was the thread. I didn't pull it yet. I let it sit. I reached out to a former colleague named Marcus who now ran independent digital investigations for insurance litigation. He wasn't cheap, and I wasn't asking him for a favor, I was hiring him. We worked together off hours for the next 2 weeks. What we built wasn't just a rebuttal to Daniel's termination. It was a documented financial map. The vendor LLCs, the routing patterns, the markup history, the timeline of Preston's access logs compared to the anomalous transactions. Marcus found 4 other employees at the company who had been quietly pushed out in the previous 18 months, all of them in roles adjacent to accounts, all of them leaving without public fanfare, 2 of them under vague policy violations that were never detailed. Daniel wasn't the first. That was the part that made my jaw tighten. This was a system, not an accident. Meanwhile, I told Daniel to do something that surprised him. I told him to wait, and to be visibly okay. Don't lawyer up publicly yet. Don't post about it. Go to the grocery store. See your friends. Let them think you're defeated, because defeated people don't come back, and right now I needed them comfortable. He didn't fully understand why, but he trusted me. He always has. When we were kids and he got cornered by older kids on the walk home, I was the one who went back to the school the next day and put the evidence in front of the vice principal so meticulously that there was no way to dismiss it. Some people fight with their hands. I fight with paper, and I have never lost. 3 weeks after Daniel was walked out, Preston posted on his personal social media a photo from a golf weekend, with the caption, "Closing deals, not cases." The comments were full of people I recognized from the company's internal directory. He was gloating. They always do when they think they've gotten away with it. Then came the moment I was waiting for. Through a professional network contact, I learned that Hargrove Properties was in the early stages of a commercial portfolio acquisition, a deal that would require a clean audit and regulatory sign-off. The timing was everything. I had spent 3 weeks building a package that I couldn't have assembled in 3 days. Now, I had leverage and a deadline, theirs, not mine. I prepared 4 separate submissions. The first went to the Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation, which oversees real estate firm licensing and requires documented financial compliance. The second went to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, not a splashy move but a traceable one that would show up in any due diligence sweep. The third went to an investigative journalist at a regional business publication who had covered Hargrove Properties before and whom I knew had asked questions about their ownership structure 2 years earlier that were never answered. The fourth was personal, a complete evidentiary package delivered to the firm's outside auditors, the ones who would be doing the compliance review for the acquisition. The auditors had a legal obligation to review it. They couldn't ignore it without exposing themselves. I didn't send any of them that night. I wanted one more thing first. There was a woman named Carol, mid-50s, 22 years at the company, head of accounts payable. She had been in the office the night the original reconciliation file was accessed. I knew this from server ping logs that Marcus had pulled through a channel I won't detail. I didn't know if Carol was involved or just a witness, but I knew she was a liability they had kept close. I sent her a very short, very carefully worded letter, not an accusation, not a threat. Just a summary of what I had found, a statement that her name appeared in proximity to several key events, and a question: had she been asked to do anything she was uncomfortable with? I gave her a secure email address and told her she had 72 hours. She wrote back in 41. She hadn't known Daniel. She hadn't been part of targeting him specifically, but she had been told by Preston's administrative assistant, relayed through a mid-level manager, to pull certain revision logs and replace them with a clean export before IT ran their monthly archive. She'd done it once before, for a different situation she hadn't fully understood. This time, she'd kept a copy of the original. She didn't know why. She said she just had a feeling. I read that email 3 times. Then I wrote back and told her I was going to make sure she was protected. With Carol's documentation, the revision log conflict, Marcus's financial mapping, and the pattern of prior terminations, the package was complete. I sent everything on a Thursday morning, all 4 submissions, simultaneously. Then I called Daniel. I told him to get a lawyer. A real one. I told him the lawyer would have a full briefing from me within the hour and that the next 72 hours were going to move fast. They did. The auditors flagged the submission to the acquisition counterparty that same afternoon. By Friday morning, the deal was on informal hold. By Friday afternoon, the DPOR had opened a preliminary review. The journalist had called the Hargrove communications director for comment on financial irregularities under investigation, a question the communications director was clearly not prepared for. I know this because the communications director called the outside counsel, who called someone inside the firm, who sent an all-staff email at 4:52 p.m. on Friday afternoon saying that certain external inquiries were being handled and that staff should direct any questions to legal. That email was forwarded to me within the hour by someone I had never spoken to before, a junior employee who had worked alongside Daniel and who had apparently been waiting for exactly this moment. Preston's response came fast. His family's lawyers sent a cease and desist to the journalist that Friday night. They sent a letter to Daniel's newly retained attorney suggesting that Daniel had fabricated the reconciliation evidence in a retaliatory attempt. They were moving aggressively, The way people move when they're scared rather than when they're right. I'd seen it before. Speed without precision is panic dressed up as strategy. My lawyer responded on Monday morning with a 30-page filing that included every piece of documentation, every timestamp, Carol's sworn statement, Marcus's independent forensic analysis, and a formal civil complaint naming Preston Hargrove III, Hargrove Properties LLC, and 2 named administrators. We weren't suing for money, not primarily. We were suing for a public retraction of the termination and formal documentation clearing Daniel's professional record, damages for lost wages and reputational harm, and a requirement for third-party financial oversight of the firm's accounts for a period of no less than 2 years. They thought we wanted a settlement. We wanted Daniel's name back. The news story ran on a Wednesday. The journalist had spent 10 days doing her own verification after receiving my original tip, and what she published went further than I expected. She had found 2 of the previously terminated employees independently. She had spoken to Carol, who had decided to go on record. The story wasn't just about Daniel. It was about a pattern of a protected executive insulating himself through strategic blame, and an HR structure that enabled it because the people running HR reported ultimately to the family. One line in the article describing Preston as someone who had leveraged his position to redirect financial scrutiny onto junior employees was shared over 6,000 times in the first 24 hours. The Hargrove family released a statement calling the reporting misleading and part of an ongoing legal dispute. It was exactly the wrong statement to release. It confirmed the dispute was real without denying any specific fact. Within a week, the acquisition fell through. The counterparty cited unresolved compliance questions in their public statement. 3 board-level advisors quietly stepped back from their affiliations with the firm. A major commercial client, a property management group that had been with Hargrove for 11 years, announced they were putting their contract out for competitive review. Collapse doesn't begin with an announcement. It begins with people quietly making different decisions. Preston's role was quietly changed to strategic advisor, non-operational according to a LinkedIn update that appeared and then disappeared within 48 hours. His father gave a brief statement to a local business publication saying the family was fully cooperating with all inquiries. The administrative assistant who had relayed the instruction to Carol resigned on a Friday and was gone by Monday. No statement, no farewell email. 3 weeks later, the DPOR issued a formal corrective action notice. 2 months after that, a civil settlement was reached. The terms are sealed. But what mattered was one paragraph in the attached side agreement, a formal written acknowledgement that Daniel Callahan had been wrongfully terminated on the basis of fabricated evidence, and that the termination would be expunged from all company records and any employment verification database the firm had reported to. Daniel got that letter on a Tuesday. He read it twice, put it down on the kitchen counter, and didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "I just want to go back to work somewhere and not think about any of this." I told him that was a reasonable thing to want. He'd already had 3 interviews by then. One of them was with a firm that had read the article and reached out to him directly. He started that job the following month. I drove home that night the long way, windows down, radio low. There's a stretch of Route 7 heading west where the Blue Ridge starts showing itself above the tree line around dusk, and for a few minutes everything feels like it has the right amount of distance. I thought about Daniel in that parking lot, voice shaking. I thought about Carol, who had kept a copy of something she didn't fully understand because something in her gut told her to. I thought about the junior employee who forwarded that internal email to a stranger because he'd watched something unfair happen and hadn't known what else to do. None of this required anything dramatic. No confrontations, no threats, no moments where I stood in front of anyone and gave a speech. Just attention, patience, documentation, and the understanding that systems built to protect the powerful rely entirely on the assumption that the people they harm won't know how to dismantle them. Preston Hargrove III was 28 years old and had never once in his life had a decision reversed. That was his real vulnerability, not arrogance, not greed, but the genuine belief that the world didn't have any mechanism for holding him accountable. It did. It just needed someone who knew how to operate it. A few weeks later, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. A woman, older, voice careful and quiet. She said she'd read the article. She said something similar had happened to her son 3 years earlier at a different company, different names, different city, same architecture of blame. She said she wished she'd known someone who knew what to do. She didn't leave a callback number. I sat with that voicemail for a long time. I don't tell this story because it ended well for Daniel, though it did. I tell it because at every single point, the people who did this to him were counting on him being alone. They were counting on the process being too complicated, too expensive, too slow, and too uncertain for someone like him to navigate without giving up first. They had done it before. They had a system. The only thing they hadn't counted on was that he had someone who had a different system, and more patience than they had comfort. Daniel called me the night before his first day at the new job. He didn't say much, just that he was nervous, the good kind, the kind you feel when something is actually yours. He asked me if I thought it would be different this time. I told him the truth. I said the world has people like Preston in it, and it probably always will. But the world also has paper trails and revision logs and quiet women who make copies of things just in case. And it has people who know what to do with those things when the moment finally comes. Go to work, I told him. I'll be here if you need me. He went. He was fine. That was enough.